The mother says in one of her talks in 1958 that it's very difficult for the mental man to understand the supramental life. Then she goes on to say that the difference between the mental life of us human beings and the supramental life is as great as the difference between the animal and the human being. And then she says something very interesting that I know of some animals, mother is saying, I know of some animals who make almost a yogic effort to understand human beings. And when they do not understand us, they suffer because of that. Think we also suffer because we don't understand the divine and his ways. Even within the human range, I think last time we stopped at the point where the psychic begins to emerge out of the human consciousness. Even between the man who lives more and more by his soul choice and the man who lives more by the mind and the vital and the physical, there is a gulf. It's difficult to understand the actions of a person in whom the psychic is beginning to take the lead. A very beautiful example that comes to mind is the example of Socrates. Socrates was condemned to take hemlock. He was sentenced to death for all the wrong reasons. It was said that he is a corrupter of the morals of the youth and he is a man who is led to disturbance in Greece. And he was sentenced to death. He gave his apology is very well known and it's really very touching to read it. And the judges pass an order that he will be executed. So Socrates is in his last night in the jail. Jail means in confinement. Next day morning he will be, or rather that night he'll be given hemlock. And the person who gives him hemlock comes and explains to him that how you have to take it, how you will know you are going to die. It is really a torture because he almost knows now. And at that point of time, he had a very rich and influential disciple, Crito. He has bribed everybody, right from the jailer, the warden, to all the high officials. So he comes to visit Socrates and says, you know, everything is ready. You just come and we'll go out. Now, any person with a rational thinking mind will say, oh, this is an opportunity. In our rational thinking, we may even say, oh, this is really grace that I am getting an opportunity to come out. What a unique way everything is arranged. And one would justify that after all, I am not guilty. But look at the way of this great yogi who lived by his inner voice. Aurobindo has spoken of him very highly. Possibly it is said that Socrates started the age of that time, in the previous cycle, he is the one who started, and possibly Aurobindo's influence was very strong on him. He was one of the vibhutis. So he declines the offer. It's very strange because he always used to consult his inner voice. If it told him, it used to go to this extent that he would suddenly take a different turn because he felt it inside that this is how you should walk. And given such an opportunity, any mental man would jump at the offer. It's very rational and he is right, he is not guilty. A vital man would simply take it immediately. But what he says is, no, I am not going to take this route. Instead he says that, Crito, can you do me a favor just before death? He says, I owe this much one cock to one of the persons. Will you give him back this cock on my behalf? He says, yes, master. And that's the last word he speaks and he dies. So it's very difficult to understand if we try to understand purely by the human mind. Perhaps that is one reason why after a certain point it's important to isolate oneself from the normal human consciousness. And the mother speaks about it, that why it is necessary, because otherwise, again and again, even if we leave aside the psychic emergence between the vital man and the mental man, it's so difficult to harmonize. The vital man acts first, thinks later. The mental man thinks first, acts later, and sometimes he only thinks and thinks and thinks, he never acts. There are people of that extreme also. So it's difficult if these two people were to live together. A lot of human problems arise simply because human beings live at different levels of consciousness and they look at life from different angles. What is important and dear to a vital man, for instance, satisfaction of ambition, desire, money, fame, etc., is no more important to that extent to a mental man. To an idealized mental man, his honor may be far more important. Certain ideals may be far more important. And to a psychic man, psychicized man, other things become important. And it's difficult to harmonize. This is one of the big problems or challenges of evolution. When we read about evolution, it appears so simple, oh, so beautiful, the psychic will emerge and then the spiritual. But in real life, all of us know it's such a difficult thing because all the past layers are in us. Nobody is a purely physical human being, nobody is a purely vital human being, nobody is a purely thinking human being. Even in the most, Aurobindo says, even in the most physical, vital human being, there is a psychic element, which is the basis or the nucleus of primitive religions. Because even they felt like relating to God in some way or the other. Even they had some touch of the sense of the beautiful. Even they had their own seeking for truth and light. Equally, even in the person who is having a spiritual consciousness, even in him there is the body and there is the vital, which ties him down to earth, pulls him down again and again from those heights. And that is why any journey, excursion into the inner life is through the highs and the low, the up and the down, what the Vedas have described as the night and the dawn, suckling the divine child. The little child must go through, sometimes he is in a bright, beautiful, luminous atmosphere because this little being who is inside, Aurobindo, the Upanishads speak of it as a being no bigger than the thumb of man, married in the mass of matter. This matter is a cradle or a womb in which this little entity is hidden. As it emerges, it has already three ministers. The mind, life and body, they are the three ministers. And if they are good ministers, they allow it to emerge. But if they are bad ministers, then they do everything to throttle the psychic life. And the more this exercises a pressure upon the human being, the more it becomes difficult for him to deal with the ordinary life as we are accustomed to. It's difficult to understand. Some people ask that why have an ashram at all? Because all life is yoga, so everything is yoga. Anywhere we can do yoga. It is true. That is one part of the truth. But there is another part of the truth, which Aurobindo brings out in one of the very interesting letters. It's, I'm not sure whether it's there in the published works, at least I couldn't find it, but this is a letter which he writes to Sahanadi, which explains many things, that if this has begun to emerge, there is a need for certain amount of quarantine or isolation. It is certainly quite true that the psychic contact can exist at a distance, and that the divine is not limited by place but is everywhere, because this is how the mind thinks. After all, divine is everywhere. Why you have to be in and around the ashram? What is there? Everywhere the divine is there. He is as much in the street of Bombay, he is as much in London, New York, he is as much in the Wall Street, which is collapsing nevertheless. So what is so special about having an atmosphere or let's say having an ashram at all? So Aurobindo is telling us, yes, it is true that divine is everywhere and the psychic being is also everywhere. It is not necessary for everybody to be at Pondicherry or physically near the mother in order to lead the spiritual life or to practice the yoga, especially in its earlier stages. Some of these Sri Aurobindo's slight, 3 or 4 words which are often missed out are very crucial. Puts a comma and says, especially in its earlier stages. But that is only one side of the truth. There is another. Human mind has this tendency to pick up one side and ignore the other. So, that famous letter of mother, rather one of her messages, an advice to newcomers. She says that people come and they come with the notion that all life is yoga, and they begin to, when they come, they are full of the psychic fullness. But slowly that fades into the background. And taking cue from Sri Aurobindo's writing that, you must take care of the body and all life is yoga, they begin to become obsessed with the body. They are only caring about the body and forget the real purpose for which we are here. It can go to that extent because human mind has 1,000 ways of deceiving itself. And its most beautiful or most, not beautiful, but the most difficult to detect deception is when it uses the divine words to justify itself. So, Sri Aurobindo is telling us, but that is only one side of the truth, there is another. Otherwise, the logical conclusion might be that there was no necessity for the mother to be here at all, or for the existence of the ashram, or for anyone to come here. So, Sri Aurobindo is telling us the other side of the truth. What is this other side? The psychic being is there in all, but in very few is it well developed, well built up in the consciousness or prominent in the front. So there is a distinction between a psychic consciousness which is there in everyone, but it is not developed. In one of the places, Sri Aurobindo says that even Hitler has a psychic consciousness, but it is almost of a London street cabman. So it is not a psychic which is really a developed psychic. It is there, buried behind. It has hardly any influence on the rest of his nature, and that is how it is. In most, it is veiled. And with his characteristic humor, Sri Aurobindo says in one of his talks, yes, everybody has a psychic being, but sometimes even I have to take it by faith because it's not always visible, it's not always in the front. It is as if absent, it is never absent. Mother describes it so beautifully that in some people they are so transparent that when I look into their eyes, I can just go down and touch that point. In others, it's like an iron wall, not one wall, wall after wall after wall. So he is telling us that it is for this reason, often in most it is veiled by, it is the veil of ignorance which Mother has spoken of. Ancient mystics spoke of this veil which veils the divine presence. This great mystic Kabir speaks about the veil which is over the beautiful face of the psychic. And this veil, the Mother says, is built of all the preferences, attachments, desires, and we all know all the rest. So it is that which veils the psychic life. It is there, but it is hidden behind a veil. The more the desires, the more the preferences, the more the doubts, the more the egoism strong in nature, the more this presence is veiled. And the more we work to remove it, it spontaneously comes out. It's like that there is in the Indian thought, there is a myth of Shaligram who emerges from the mud. So if you find that stone which looks like a god almost, and if you find that stone, it's supposed to be very sacred, and you have to then clean it, wipe it and place it. So psychic is there inside all of us, like Shaligram inside the mud. But it is covered up with so much mud that hardly anything is visible or felt. Often ineffective or only an influence. He is like the speaker who cannot speak in the assembly. Ineffective. He tries to control a very difficult crowd and nobody listens to him. though he is the speaker, like the president, he has very little role to play. So the psychic is often ineffective or only an influence, not conscious enough or strong enough to support the spiritual life. It is for this reason that it is necessary for those drawn towards this truth to come here in order that they may receive the touch which will bring about or prepare the awakening of the psychic being. So it's like a beautiful nursery which has been made with elements. It's very interesting. This mother has put here all the necessary elements which help in the blossoming of the psychic life, and on the other hand, it smashes the life made of ego and desire. So both things, because they are two sides of the same truth. So this whole place is built in such a way that if a person tries to be egoistic, somebody else will come and rip his mask. Because it's built like that. It's the very nature of this place that it doesn't support the ego life. It doesn't support the life of desire. If one tries to do that, one becomes increasingly unhappy because she has made it. It's a whole formation. At the same time, if one tries to lead a psychic life, we just heard her message, which was given after an attack on the ashram, where she says, those who have a soul can see it. So if this develops, one automatically feels, and everything is here to nurture it. A few minutes sitting before the samadhi, and one feels so beautifully blossoming inside. And this, I think, is really unique. One doesn't have to pay any money to reach there. Unlike so many big temples and places where you have to have a simple darshan and a special darshan and a deluxe darshan and a VIP pass and a VVIP pass. All that we need to do is to just walk in. And sometimes we are asked whether we are staying in an ashram guest house or not. That is fair enough. And you just walk in, it's so close. It's amazing that we can live here for years without walking to the samadhi. This is the paradox of human nature. But it is there, available to all. Anyone can come. Like a veritable Shiva. She doesn't question. One comes, who are you? Doesn't matter. You walk near, sit near, open, and you receive. So she has created this place in such a way that nurtures the psychic life. So Aurobindo is telling us, it is for this reason that it is necessary for those drawn towards this truth to come here in order that they may receive the touch. It's like an initiation, which will bring about or prepare the awakening of the psychic being. That is for them the beginning of the effective psychic contact. Because it's veiled and there are layers beyond layers, so a touch is needed to create a passage. It's true that this passage closes very soon. In fact, when we enter into the ashram, to give an example, it opens. When we walk out, it closes. It can be so swift as that. Sometimes not even that. By the time one is wearing the chappals, the passage is already closed. But because it has been created and because repeatedly the drilling is there, a time comes when it no more closes. There is that beautiful story of Kalidas, that he is outcast by his wife because he is a fool and he is thrown into the forest and he is feeling miserable and disgusted with life. He says, what is it? I am such an idiot that I am thrown out of the house of the palace. And that time he sees that water is falling on a stone. And when he sees the water falling on stone, he observes that over a period of time, this water has created a little dent in the stone. So he says, if a simple liquid, which is hardly powerful enough, can create a dent with persistence over a rock, then why can't I receive knowledge? And sure enough, once he has that will, the aspiration, and of course he was marked out, it is said that the goddess, mother goddess herself appears before him and gives him the knowledge. But this is the reason why one persists, because if one doesn't persist, the door closes again and again. It is also for this reason that a stay here is needed for many, if they are ready. Everybody cannot bear this pressure of this consciousness. So Aurobindo is telling us, if one is ready. If one is not ready, then one comes all the way to Pondicherry, But instead of finding the divine, one finds the wine and goes back. And says, well, Pondicherry is a beautiful place because, it has the best wines. One doesn't know that there is another Soma wine here, which is far more effective and far more intoxicating. It is also for this reason that a stay here is needed for many, if they are ready, in order that under the direct influence and nearness, they may have the development or building up of the psychic being in the consciousness, or it's coming to the front. So the thing implied here is that the psychic develops. It is not something static. Like the mind, life and body, the psychic develops. This is something very interesting which Aurobindo brings out, because in tradition, the soul is supposed to be a fixed thing. One realizes the soul and that's the end of it. But the soul, which enters into the evolutionary process, Aurobindo makes a distinction between, not really a distinction, but that part of the individual Jivatma which enters into time and space for the evolutionary adventure, that becomes the psychic being. So it develops. And like anything that is developing, it needs its food. And if the food is not supplied, it begins to stifle and starve. Just like matter needs material food. Vital needs vital food. There are people who are, the moment they get vital food, they become energized. They don't even need to eat because they are eating the vital. And there are people who can go to this extent that they feed on others' vital. Mother and Aurobindo has spoken about it. So they eat the vital. And if vital is not there, they start feeling, totally out. Then there are people who live in the mind. They need mental food. Similarly, there is the psychic, and the psychic needs psychic food. And the psychic food is, psychic needs the divine. And all that can bring it in close contact with the divine. So when we read Mother and Aurobindo, it's like a psychic food. When we hear Mother's music, it's like a psychic food. When we go to the Samadhi, it's a psychic food. When we take her name, it's a psychic food. So psychic life develops in contact with the spiritual and the divine things. When the touch has been given or the development effected, so far as the sadhak is at the moment capable, he returns to the outside world. And under the protection and guidance, even at a distance, is able to keep the contact and go on with his spiritual life. So one comes, receives the touch and goes back. And goes back for some time, that psychic life is activated and it keeps him moving under the guidance in some way or the other. But, and here comes the big but the influences of the outside world are not favorable to the psychic contact and the psychic development. And if the sadhak is not sufficiently careful or concentrated, the psychic contact may easily be lost after a time or get covered over, and the development may become retarded. So this is the big challenge or the problem when, of course, this is written in 1930s, probably 36 or 37. This letter is 31. Thanks to the new consciousness, things are changing all over the world. But still it is true that largely the outer world does not support the psychic life. And if one has an intense psychic life, one begins to feel that one is deprived, spiritually famished, if one may say so. At least just recently when I went out, always this experience is there, but towards the end, when someone asked, how are you feeling? I said, spiritually famished, because one is missing every drop of the air which one breathes. The moment one breathes this air, one feels that the lungs are full of that consciousness which gives delight naturally. So Aurobindo is telling us that the world and its contacts are not conducive to the spiritual life. And that is why sometimes one has to isolate oneself. It is a reverse isolation. One is other kind of isolation which we doctors do. If somebody has a swine flu case, we isolate. But here is another kind of isolation, that one has to isolate oneself from all the contacts which are not conducive to the psychic life. It has nothing to do with any moral principle. It has nothing to do with any feeling of elitist. It is nothing to do with any superiority complex, because these things by their very nature are not at all consistent with the spiritual life. But it has something to do with a very simple practical rule of spiritual life, that if one throws oneself again and again into the same mud from which the divine hand is lifting us out, then it takes ages and much is lost. So it becomes diminished, stationary, or even diminished by adverse influences or movements. It is therefore that the necessity exists and is often felt of a return to the place of the central influence. Look at the beauty of Sri Aurobindo's words. A word which will last forever. He is using the term place of central influence for the ashram. It's a word which can really never be replaced because it's independent of everything else. A place of central influence. In order to fortify or recover the contact, or to restore or give a fresh forward impulse to the development. It's like recharging one's lungs with the fresh air. This is strange. I had a very touching experience, very long time, not much long time, 4 years back. There was a lady who had never come to the ashram. And for 12 years she was wanting to come to ashram, but for some reason or the other, she came from a village in Bihar and nobody was sympathetic to the ashram and they just ignored her and she could never come on her own. And then she developed a very malignant disease which spread to the bones and all the part of her body, and she was in intense pain. So toward the end of her life, when she was on very high dose of painkillers, 10 tablets of Proxivon, which is addicting, she told to her children and husband that I have only one wish, 12 years I am asking you, please take me to the ashram. Now imagine that she couldn't come when she was healthy. So finally, in fact, the person contacted and they came here, and she was brought on a stretcher because she just could not even get up. She was having pain to what extent it's really difficult to imagine. She was staying in shelter and some of us went and took her and literally carried her on the stretcher all around the samadhi. Special permission was taken to come through the side door. And she went around the samadhi and constantly she would touch, and the emotion she evoked inside, that when she was going back, all of us who were in the ambulance felt a stillness which comes by the pressure of the soul. There was such an intense stillness and a joy in the atmosphere, which was amazing. But the only thought that came, which was shared by some other persons also, was that look, she has taken the pains to come from what a distance, with what a disease, with what a problem, just to have one glimpse of this place, one touch of the samadhi. And after 2 months she died. She died on 21st February. And then her relations, they called me up and they said, you know, she was so peaceful for the next 2 months that touch which was received was enough to sustain her, who knows for how many lives. But this is one side of the story. The other side of the story is us. And we have right next to us the great consciousness, and yet it's so difficult to receive. This is the paradox of human life. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us the aspiration for such nearness from time to time is not a vital desire. Sometimes people say, oh, this is just a vital desire. God is inside you. You don't have to go to an ashram or a samadhi. Mind will give this kind of reason. Why do you have to go there? It is inside. Anywhere you can sit and meditate. It is fine. All this is theoretical. The mind is speaking because the mind has no experience or idea that even when one is in contact inside, what difference it makes when one is face to face with the divine. The aspiration for such nearness from time to time is not a vital desire. It becomes a vital desire only when it is egoistically insistent or mixed with a vital motive. That if I go there, my desire will be fulfilled. So this can be a vital motive. But not if it is an aspiration of the psychic being calm, deep, and without clamor. This is for those who are not called upon or not yet to live in the ashram under the direct pressure of the central force and presence. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us it's a pressure and a tremendous pressure to change. Those who must so live are those called from the beginning, or who have become ready, or who are for some reason or other given a chance to form part of the work. For them, the stay here in the atmosphere, the nearness are indispensable. To depart, a turning of the back upon the spiritual destiny. Their difficulties are often in appearance greater than the struggle of those who remain outside. It's another interesting thing, that the closer we come to the divine, on one side there is the immense grace, on the other side, because we are face to face with truth, nothing can remain hidden. There is a great mystic who has said, what is the price for sitting in the temple of the divine? We have this, as I was saying, special darshans and deluxe darshans, 100 rupees, 1000 rupees. Sure enough, if money is the price, it is not divine to whom we are going, but somewhere else. The price for sitting in the temple of the divine, there is a great mystic who says that there is one price, that if you are willing to cut your head and keep it on the side, then you are fit to walk and sit into the sanctum sanctorum. If you are willing to shed this, which is always so full of pride. Last time I think we had read that this thing which is of which human intellect, of which man is so rightly and yet so vainly proud. If this pride we can lose and are willing to surrender. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us their difficulties are often in appearance greater than the struggle of those who remain outside, because the demand and pressure are greater. The demand is great. One cannot be in front of the divine and harbor falsehood. One can be far and is allowed. It's like, one is allowed to an extent. But the moment one comes and the closer one gets, the more difficult and more intense the whole process becomes. So this is another paradox, that the closer we are to the divine, on one side there is a tremendous protection and grace. On the other side, there is a great blow and hammering which starts. But so also is their opportunity greater, and the power and influence for development poured upon them, and that too which they can spiritually become and will become, if. Now this is another one of those Sri Aurobindo's small half phrases which change the whole sense or give a new sense. So Sri Aurobindo is saying, the development poured upon them, and that too which they can spiritually become and will become, if they are faithful to the choice and the call. So this if becomes a big if that stands between us and the divine. So this is the emergence of the psychic life in a mentalized man, a life which emerges with great difficulty. And while it is all right, so long as we are still in the stage of a mental seeking, Sri Aurobindo has everywhere drawn a distinction between a mental seeking and a spiritual call. Mental seeking is of the nature of intellectual understanding of the divine. One reads books, one tries to see what is what, one even does all kinds of explorations, like exploratory expeditions. One goes here, one goes there, says this is good, that is bad, passing all kinds of judgments, because one does not have the eye to see. But the moment this begins to emerge, because in the human race still the world is not yet a psychicized world. We live in a world which is largely built by hunger, that is death. That is how this world is described in the Upanishads, and Sri Aurobindo speaks about this world. It is built by hunger, that is a death. So all around the world there is nothing but hunger that is expressed. In one of her talks, Mother speaks of Paris, such a wonderful city, and she gives a talk and she says, if you think of this city, what is there? Everything here is made of desire. Everything. People go outside and they are projecting desire, as if the whole city is built of a mass of desires. And then she says in one of her prayers, She says, how difficult it is to develop this spiritual life of man, which lies in so much inertia. And then she adds, how much more difficult. First, he says, what a tremendous effort of divine love, labor of divine love is required to pull man out of this inertia and somnolence so that they can breathe a little bit of authentic spirituality. But then she says, how much more difficult for those who live a life in the cities. How very few cities were there then. How much more difficult. A much greater effort will be required to pull those who live in the life of cities. Because if one really looks at the life of cities, for all its beauty and glamour, it is built around desire. The whole purpose cities came into existence was commerce, desire. Go to any city, you have eating places and buying places, and places that manufacture. Very few places where one can really breathe the divine. So this is the reason why, as this begins to emerge, there is a need to a certain extent of collectivity where one can be together and breathe together the divine atmosphere. Aurobindo speaks of 3 cardinal principles of nurturing the spiritual life. We'll talk about it next time. And he draws it, he says that in every time the avatar comes and does a work, he gives 3 main tenets through which one can nurture the consciousness that he leaves upon earth. And then he draws the parallel from Buddha. He says Buddha says 3 things. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami, Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. So one takes shelter first in the dharma, the path that is shown. That is the shelter and the security. The second is a collectivity which nurtures the spiritual life. Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. It is meant to nurture the spiritual life, an ideal collectivity. And third, most important of all, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. The divine who has manifested himself as the avatar upon earth.